Hello, welcome to Intimate Discourse. My name is Jason. This episode, State Power and the Entropy Blues, was recorded on July 31st, 2022, the year of our Lord, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We really want to thank you for listening to us today, and I hope you have a really good week and month even. Enjoy. Hello, folks. Welcome to Intimate Discourse. This is Jason, and I'm here with Dimitri.
I am Dimitri.
He is. All right, so we've had a lot of technical difficulties with the show. We've recorded it several times. I've said this very sentence several times. We've recorded hours of content for this thing, and we're gonna come back at it, hopefully for the final time. Although we've said that before too.
You know what though? I love it. It's a process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
the whole thing
yeah.
is an organic process, and we're just getting better incrementally. And you know what? Maybe this is a metaphor for what we're even talking about today. Trying to understand the process that's happening on Earth and how to make it better one step at a time.
Right.
This is part of the birthing process.
Leave
Jason.
it to you to put a positive spin on
Always
all this disaster.
That's right.
All right. So this episode, folks, what we're trying to do here, and thank you for listening. Let me say that because I really, this process, it becomes a real echo chamber if nobody's listening. And, I do like having these conversations with Dimitri, but I really like knowing that there's an audience out there that's also hearing this. And again, if anyone has anything, any comments they want to make, please send us a message. And we would like to get a conversation going with others as well. We've got a few other things in the pipeline in terms of developing this into a little more of a community as well, so we can get some more feedback. But by all means, shoot us an email, message us on Facebook, and we'll have a few other mediums open for your convenience soon, so we can kind of get this conversation a little more what would you say? What is the word for that? Like two-way, I guess. Say
communal.
Binaural?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just maybe communal. Like,
Okay.
I really probably said this before in other podcasts. You change the world one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
Whether it's with one person one-on-one or 100 people listening or a million people listening.
So, and I don't know if you folks have noticed, but Dimitri's got a new mic, and he's kind of showing off his new digs here, right?
That's right.
Your voice comes through really clear.
I
and
feel a lot
nice
more natural now too.
Yeah. Sounds a lot better.
We're in the same room. It's true.
What we'd like to talk about today is what we view as a movement of Western governments to restrict the rights and freedoms of its citizens. We've discussed some of these themes in previous episodes, whether it's COVID vaccine policies, gun laws, infringements upon free speech. All these issues betray a tendency, whether well-intentioned or malicious, or even whether it's conscious or unconscious, of governments of the Western world to gravitate toward restricting the rights and freedoms of its citizens. And what's worse, a willingness of the people to accept this. I'm not sure that this isn't even a universal constant. If you remove malintent from the equation even, and give the benefit of the doubt, in order to govern mass numbers of people in the most effective way and to do the most good for the most amount of people, things generally work better when the government isn't hamstrung by contrarian voices bellowing out their discontent from the bleachers. This is why a dictatorship tends to be the most effective style of government in terms of actually executing their mandate. And it is, after all, the job of democratically elected governments to not only represent the will of the people, but to ensure that the policies which represent the will of the people are implemented in the most efficient and the most economical way possible. Governments, by and large, tend to gravitate toward increasing state power. It's almost a natural byproduct. It's up to the people and to the courts to ensure that the government is held in check. This is why Western democracies like Canada and the United States have broad first principle frameworks within which the government must operate. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. These relatively immutable tenets were drawn up with the idea that they could be used to keep a government in check, should they ever get too big for their britches. But these first principles are only as powerful as the people's will to enforce them, and their will to stand up in defense of them. All too often these days, we've seen a dangerous acquiescence to authority among the subjects of Western nations. This apathy of the people tends to run in tandem with the prevalence of technology. You could be lured into thinking that with technology, the people are now better educated and can make more informed decisions on, say, who they're going to vote for or which companies they'll buy from, etc. And you might even be tempted to think that these governments and corporations are now being held to account more than ever before, because the power is now with the people who have a direct voice and who can amalgamate those voices into angry virtual mobs which can cancel A-list celebrities for breakfast and bring a Fortune 500 company to heel by the end of the week. You may be tempted to believe this, and this might even be true in some cases, but not in the aggregate. To explain what I mean, I'm going to zoom out quite a bit, about as far as I can go actually, and look at the universe as a whole and the physical laws that we perceive to be governing it. One of those axioms is that entropy is always increasing. We're moving from an intensely structured pseudo-singularity, the Big Bang, to a dissimulated, dissolved, watered-down, hopelessly unstructured mist. Entropy, or disorder, is always increasing. Another way of looking at it is that everything is averaged out over time. The average is the norm, I guess by definition. The average is the norm, and the only thing stopping us from asphyxiating right now is entropy. In theory, all the oxygen molecules in this room could decide to congregate into one corner, leaving us with no air to breathe. It's fairly random whether any individual molecule will go to one corner of the room, or the other, or the middle of the room, or whether it will just flit right under our noses. But they'll move somewhere, and on average they'll fill the room and we'll be able to breathe. That's entropy. It's like the idea of flipping a quarter. There are actually websites you can go to that will simulate this if you don't want to get your hands dirty. And these sites are actually really cool for those of us who like statistics, by the way. Anyway, you might find that if you flip 10 coins, you'll get 7 or even 8 that come up heads or tails. Every once in a while, randomly, you'll get that kind of a distribution. But the more times you flip them, if you go beyond 10 to 20 or 50 or 100, the more that you do that, the closer your overall average of heads versus tails will gravitate toward exactly 50%, which is what you would expect. That's entropy. Everything breaks down and smooths out over time. If you only had a handful of air molecules, they might all congregate into one corner, and we would die. But if you have trillions upon trillions of air molecules in a room, which we do, the likelihood that they'd all move to one corner is about as likely as you rolling a pair of dice and them coming up snake eyes millions of times in a row over and over. Now, I'm sure a physicist would balk at my correlating social systems with this principle, but there seems to be at least a little bit of a parallel here. Or in any case, I'm going to force one through. What we're talking about today is a consolidation of power and a homogenization of values. More and more, everyone is getting the same message, and more people are falling in line with it. Where once we'd have city-states and quaintly distinct village communities, now we have megacities and world governments. Where once there was Bach and Da Vinci, now there's the Kardashians, reality TV, and a seemingly endless deluge of insipid Marvel movies, all seemingly designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator. People used to stand up and fight for their rights, against all odds, with their lives on the line and with disparate organization. But in the West, most of our protesting is done through listless retweets and hapless virtue signaling, and those that actually do put something on the line to protest often seem misguided or unfocused, tending more to strive toward nihilistic impulses than fighting for a cause that they truly believe in. Okay, sure, this isn't always the case. Entropy doesn't just come in and destroy everything all at once, after all. There is still beautiful music being made, stories being told that are riddled with magic and intrigue. There are still events like the Canadian Truckers Convoy, the Arab Spring, even individuals like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, who, despite what you might think of their politics, are still counted among those who raise their fists against the tyrannical onslaught of thermodynamic inevitability. But in the aggregate, we are slipping, us children of democracy. While we're empowered by technology and can use it to help us learn and mobilize, the governments and major corporations of the world are just much more adept at it. In countries like China, or some of the more totalitarian regimes out there today, the use of technology to achieve the will of the state can be devastating. Your movements can be monitored with ease, what you say can be recorded, Your beliefs and even your thoughts can be distilled into quantifiable scores to assess whether you're a good citizen or not. Democratic governments, of course, can't openly do such things, not yet anyway. If you're a democratic government, you serve at the behest of the people, at least in principle, and the people don't want to be governed in such a way. We want our freedoms. We want our privacy. We want a white picket fence, a high-salaried job, a purpose, love, and the American dream. We want all the upsides of a technological society and none of the downsides, and we don't want to put too much work into it either. We want it all, and we want it made simple for us. And so, if you're governing such a society, you can never actually go against the will of the people. You'd be destroyed. But the good news is you don't really have to. You merely need to use the vast array of tools at your disposal to bend the people's will to what you already want. And with that simple trick, the world is yours. And so to sum up my little soliloquy here, and of course, thank you for your patience in indulging me. What we seem to be seeing as the trend in Western societies is our tendency. It tends to be toward more government control, more homogenization, less creativity. And I say this in the wake of there being some incredibly creative and incredibly genius people in the world.
Well, we're all human. That's going to keep popping up,
Right,
we hope
right,
that as each mountain collapses and, averages into some boring mean, you almost hope that new ones simultaneously pop up.
And new ones will pop up, but overall, you're getting more and more entropy into the system. So your overall will eventually, they'll all drown out. So
For sure. Is the world not far more centralized today than just 100 years ago?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
For all the variations in diversity, inclusion, and equity, and everything else, it's still more centralized.
For sure. Yeah.
Overall. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, just look at our the current problems with the supply chain and everything. It's it's a very centralized and very mostly people are buying things from Amazon, right? Despite whatever you want. Anyway, so I'm not sure how, okay. What I would say is that I would like to sort of set the stage there and just sort of say we're more and more coming toward this kind of one world idea. That's why you have big things like the IMF or the World Bank or what is the
globalism even?
Globalism,
it's a 90s word, but it was the first sort of what would you call it? Mass acceptance of such ideas.
Right, right.
Isn't it great? We can spread the wealth around the world and employ people in different parts. Absolutely. Yeah. This is amazing. But it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think of being in other countries and seeing McDonald's there. And don't you think I don't know, there's something just so there's no difference.
What do you feel, Jay, when you see McDonald's?
I feel like it's ugly. That's what it is.
I know. I agree with you.
Or
you want to go to Rome and walk into perhaps a substandard cafe compared to your Starbucks, but have that authentic Roman experience. Right. And that may be, quote unquote, a substandard experience, but it's still authentic to the moment and place you're in.
Right.
A lot of history has led up to culturally how the person's going to interact with you, the type of coffee you're drinking, the noises and sounds in such a cafe. It's unique. And whether it's better or worse isn't really what we're looking for. It's the fact that it's authentic to the place you're in.
Yeah. But the funny thing, though, with the McDonald's thing is when we're going to, I'll say Olive Garden, because I assume that was made, that was an American company. But if you're getting, the only thing that's ugly about that is that I'm used to seeing McDonald's, right? So if you're in, I'm sure everybody is now.
Good point.
You know what I mean? So they have their own things. If you see, I don't know, I'm thinking of a Chinese restaurant Dragon Court or whatever, or something Dragon, that those places here, it's kind of I'm sure Chinese people are just rolling their eyes. And it's oh, I wish they'd I'm not here for this. I'm here for to go on a authentic American or Canadian experience. Anyway, yeah, I do that. You see it more and more, and I know everybody talks about I don't like seeing I'm all for I love different ethnic foods and everything like that, but there's something about the I don't know, ethos, I guess, or whatever, of a culture that it's almost like a pristine beach. You don't want that to be, you don't want you don't want more and more people coming there, right?
Rough around the edges is more natural.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that has its own beauty, even if it's rough.
Right.
When I see an all-inclusive hotel, I cringe.
Yeah.
When I think about the I don't know, just the politics or the fact that capitalism is allowed on this one little part of a Cuban beach, but the rest of the people suffer,
Right.
I cringe.
Yeah.
There's nothing, even though my experience as a consumer may be better, I just don't want to be part of that fake environment. It's like the Truman Show, really.
Yeah.
Don't walk off the compound.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But you'll have a great time if you stay here.
Yeah.
That's not real. I might as well stay in my backyard. Or when people go on vacation and they swim in swimming pools. I never say, you have the Caribbean and Mediterranean. I don't like fish. Well, then why are you there? Just stay in a pool, and put a 3D projection on top of your head. You don't need to be there, you know?
I mean, there's something to be said for nice resorts. And you said all-inclusive hotel. I'm like, I don't know. I kind of like all that. That's where I like to stay. But I do know what you mean.
It's a mode of thinking.
I know what you mean.
I don't mean it in a disparaging way. I've done it once. And the first day, I was like, so this is it? Like, this is my playpen.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's it. This is it. This is it. I'm not going to be getting on an ATV and exploring anywhere else. Like literally I'm going to sit on a lounger right here. And by day 2 or 3, I was in a groove and I understood sort of like almost like a puppy dog in its crate. I'm like, okay, this is a nice pen and I chose this pen, and I can leave the pen when I want to. But I have to admit, even though it was a 7-day trip, by day 4, I was like, okay, I'm done of this. Like I'm relaxed enough. I need some adventure.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on what you want from a vacation, I guess. But your point is well taken. Like there are like that is a more authentic experience, and like if you want to really well, it goes back a lot to what we were talking about in another episode where it's this whole idea of if you're a spirit looking, or if you're a spirit who wants to be sort of alive, and it's like, what are the things you would wish for being alive? And it isn't necessarily comfort, right? So it's that idea of experiencing things and such. Anyway, let's not digress too much into our previous episode. Okay, so I think there were two trends two events that occurred in the late 2000s or the early 2010s that kind of I think catapulted us toward what we're seeing a lot. I think there was a trend toward it anyway, for sure. But these things sort of almost were like a jump start or
great accelerant.
The great accelerants, yes. Number one was the invention of the iPhone, which was such a revolutionary idea. Of course, you had BlackBerries before that, but something about the iPhone, I guess the slickness of it and the ability to have apps that you would use, like, people used to go on Facebook, on their computers at home or whatever, but when they finally could sort of, you're on the computer at home, you could always unplug. You'd get called for dinner, you'd go outside, you'd go on a date with somebody, and you wouldn't necessarily be thinking about Facebook or be thinking about Twitter or whatever. Now you carry that around with you. You can be out on a date and still continue to, go on Twitter, and you can go to bed and you can curl up with your little Facebook feed. Yeah. So these are profound changes, and we could do entire shows just on the effects. There's so many effects psychologically and sociologically from that invention and from the embracing of that. It really is like a new appendage. Like it's, I think there's some truth to the whole meme about people not wanting to be, like you taking away their phone and it's like causing some sort of existential crisis for people. Like I think that's, I see that. I don't think I'm personally there. Like I really try to limit the use of the phone, but it's a real conscious effort that I have to do. And I don't know, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm one of the cool ones, but
it's a Pandora's box.
Yeah.
It has everything in it.
Right.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really is like you can't, once you open it up, it's hard to tear yourself away from it.
For sure. By design.
By design, yeah, of course. Yeah, by perpetual design as well. Like they're still doing things. And whatever. Like, I mean, I'm not even blaming necessarily technology companies for doing this. Like they're trying to do what sells. Like, I mean, I think there's some sense of social responsibility they should have there, but more like it's up to the people. It's
You
up to
know,
people to-
yeah, I'm libertarian that way too, but it's interesting because a lot of these companies are all clamoring for their ESG scores, you know, their environmental, social,
Right.
and good governance, yet, but we'll make it as addictive as possible. Shouldn't that be part of the score if you're going to be doing something like that?
But you know, it really does become part of like at the end of the day, it's like you really do get the government and the society that you deserve. And like if people are not if it doesn't matter to somebody that their iPhone is made in a sweatshop, you know what I mean? And people like are trying to, you know, are sort of prevented from killing themselves because they're so depressed with their life. You know, but they hit a net and then it's like, oh, back to work. And like, you were going to take away some of your pay for like trying to kill yourself there. Like if there's a situation where, you know, if people know about that and are still okay with using their iPhone, and not to say, you know, again, like, I don't know, like this is like, you know, this isn't like, you know, there are companies that make these things that you hear stories about, you know, whatever the sub companies from, Apple, and other, you know, manufacturers of electronics. Like a lot of these things are made overseas and they're made like,
Sure.
you know, so these kinds of things do happen. But like, you know, it's the same thing with, you know, people making, you know, like the clothing a lot of people wear, right? Like a lot of the stuff is made in sweatshops as well. So it's like if consumers have basically said to producers, we don't care about that stuff. You know, we'll still buy it.
Okay.
Like as long as it's cheap.
Wait, I'm going to fall a little more leftist on this than you.
Okay.
Because just like we have ingredients that have to be listed on everything you buy, and was it frozen or fresh, and this and that, and those are government regulations, and there's certain ingredients that are allowed and certain ingredients that are not allowed, and those are also government regulations. Couldn't you not also argue that when it comes to something like social media, there should be warning labels and regulations on how addictive, how many notifications you get a day, what's the color of said notification, because these colors are more addictive than those colors. Like you could break down a health meter probably in a good way to make it viable versus a highly addictive way of making it viable. And wouldn't having government regulation in this case actually make the app still profitable and functional, just but adhering to rules that are a little more health conscious? Because if you just let the Wild Wild West go, then you'd have, you know, cigarettes available from the age of 5 and older with no labeling on it. And who knows what ingredients are inside.
Well, I would say that it's the parents' job to know. I mean, I think that
So
it's
would you argue
important.
cigarettes could be like have no ingredients and no warning label? Because if so, then it's logically consistent.
Well, no, it's hard to answer because I'm coming at this from the context of obviously everybody knows about cigarettes being bad for you, but I guess that wouldn't be obvious in a world where there wasn't a label.
And now you got to, if we've only had this, like you said, for 10 years, imagine going just 10 years into the life of commercial cigarettes availability, where we didn't know such things about it.
Well, I
And
think
before you
there's
know, we're all addicted
well,
because we just let it go.
I think there's a part to play for like the Canada Health or like the FDA. Like I think there are they have a part to play in this stuff. Yeah, like warning labels and everything like that, and making sure food quality is up to snuff. Everything, you know. But I think that you start talking about somewhat more intangible things, like for example, the colors that they're able to use on, you know, ads on Facebook or something. It becomes more like, well, that's just advertising. Like that's what they're supposed to do. Is they're trying to sell, you know, or like, you know.
But can we be hacked? Like, is this just like psychologically hacking people to the point it's happening on a subconscious level, and you just become victim of it because you don't even know what's happening to you?
No, I think that is a abdication of responsibility for the average consumer. Like, I think that people have, and I think that's part of the problem, is that people have just relied too much on the government or even companies to some extent. Like, well, I love my Mac or whatever, and it's like, you know, your Mac doesn't necessarily love you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you, loyal to Microsoft? Like, you know, there's
Well, if it becomes an addiction,
yeah,
you will feel loyalty to it.
for sure. Yeah, people do.
Or cult-like, or even people when they work for certain companies, it becomes like their self-identity and their occupation become one and the same.
Well, it's like people who are buying, like I understand people buy like shirts that say Nike on it or whatever because, sometimes you just get a cheap shirt and it says it on it or whatever. But there are people who actually buy shirts because of a brand. Like, remember the whole Dolce & Gabbana thing where it would people would get them just because it said Dolce & Gabbana. It's like,
Parasuco.
you like, yeah. So what do you, like, you're just, I don't know. The people who do that kind of thing, I think they're making sort of a poor choice. Like, I think but they're making a choice. Like, they have, like, if you choose to take your phone to bed with you and sort of like forego all your regular relationships with your family and your friend, and it's more important to you how many like likes you get on your Instagram post, then I think that it's, you've made your bed, so to speak.
But should there be like an age limit on such a thing?
Yeah,
or
probably.
Apps that are like, under 18 years of age, these are the colors and notifications you have to have if you have an app. And over the, after once you're an adult, because I'm with you completely on the, once you're an adult, any regulation I'm sort of, behind here greatly diminishes. But there's still got to be some framework.
Well, I would say that it's the parents' responsibility to make sure that their kids aren't exposed to that kind of stuff. Although I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to like some sort of, like, the thing is you can always get around that anyway. It's not like you're going to, like, what, they can't sell to a 7-year-old?
So what if there was a cartoon on that had like, I don't know, gratuitous sex scenes and it was just on TV?
Well, parents would have a responsibility not to let their kids watch that. Now, if you're saying like, well, how would a parent know they can't review every single thing? Well, then the television station would gain a reputation for being somebody who does weed that stuff out, right? Like, that's how those things evolve in a corporate marketplace.
I don't know. I think going back to your opening statement, how things all sort of homogenize around a standard, I think that standard could be just that's just the way it's always been. Of course, kids watch pornography at the age of 9, kind of thing.
Things are already homogenizing. Like, whether it's just that governments are more involved than they should be. Like, I'm not saying there shouldn't be government involvement in anything. I'm just saying that, like, we have to limit it to more almost quantifiable things.
I'm all for small government too, but small and precise and with like really good like reasoning behind it.
Small and precise, and good reasoning and quantifiable. So like, if you're saying like, you can't have more than 0.2 micrograms of some toxin or whatever, something that is bad for you, like the whole trans fat thing. If you're going to sort of enforce something like that, and you've done studies and you can show the public that it is demonstrably bad for people if you're eating this much trans fat, like but it has to be real bad. Like, it has to be like, this is going to, like, kill people, make them sick, whatever, then there is a line there where I think the government can step in and say, like, okay, well, we've measured it. Here's what it is. Here are our studies. Here are our findings. And then it's like, okay, that's fine. That's quantifiable. You've shown the studies. You have something to back it up. But if you start getting into like, well, we have to make sure that everybody calls people their preferred pronoun, or like any number of other subjective things.
It's counter to my point. If they were to say, I don't know, we have an app on your phone and we know how much red meat you ate this week, and we just know too much red meat is bad. So therefore, we're going to step in now, Jason, and say you can't have any more red meat. I'm like, well, let me make that decision, or let you make that decision. You're an adult.
Right.
Like, thanks for the heads up. I'm going to make my own decision.
Yeah, like if they want to put it to that point, like if you want to put warning labels on cigarettes or something, I don't necessarily agree with that. But if you want to, I can understand that's the...
Well, theoretically, you can put a warning label on anything then.
Sure, there's warning
Where
labels
do you
on
actually
Spotify
stop when you open that?
Yeah, like I think it makes it, I think I would prefer that, because at least it's like people still have the choice to do it, right? Like, you could get the thing going off on your phone about you can't have any more red meat, and you can be like, well, I'm just disregarding that and having it anyway.
As long as that doesn't come with a negative impact on any sort of social credit score or something. Although, it's simply a heads up.
But that sure makes things easy for actuaries, right? Like, because if you're have all that information, it's like, boy, they're like, if they weren't figuring out the most optimum choice of clients then, like before, then they sure will with this. This
is a difficult question, because then, it's kind of like, to counter my point again, it would be my own, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah. It was a good intention to stop, to put regulations in and whatnot, but are you actually empowering the individual citizen to make their own conscious decisions and be independent in thought?
Right.
Or are you simply having nanny state?
So, well, this is the problem I have with governments. Like, this is why it really needs to be the absolute minimum. Like when you hear these people, like we've talked before, well, in our gun control episode, it's like you have people passing laws because, it's easy to sell to a public like this thing is bad. So, nobody wants anything bad, right? Like that kind of a thing. And the government is interfering and then taking away a right or something like that. We have to be very careful about that as a society, because even though we might not agree with one particular thing, it's the overall encroachment of rights that get greater and greater throughout the years.
Yeah, where does it end?
Yeah. Yeah. Where does it end?
And right for one person is not right for another. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know if I have an answer for that one though, but yeah, I guess sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, because I can, it's the kind of thing I can always see the other side of this where it's like, okay, like you take it in isolation, a lot of these things seem reasonable. It's like, with the guns, it's like, okay, well, we don't want, it's hard to argue with somebody who's just like lost somebody because of gun violence and they're saying like, well, what do you need the gun for anyway? And it's like, okay, well, like, because I don't necessarily have a great need for a gun, but at the same time, I want to be able to have one if I want one. Like, if other people are allowed to have them.
There's just so many cases though where government regulation has truly, made our life better. Like building codes, safety on vehicles. If we simply left it to the free market, I think it might average to just whatever's more profitable for the corporations.
Yeah, yeah.
Like remember our generation, the side impact beams on the cars, if that wasn't actually put into law, would every car manufacturer put those in? Or would you like, well, some do and some don't.
What was the side impact beams?
You don't remember? Around the early 90s, they sort of made a new regulation where your doors on the side had to have beams, horizontal beams, that were regulated to a certain strength. So if you got T-boned, you had a side impact beam. Oh. And it was regulation.
Yeah.
Like they must have them going forward, sort of thing. So, I mean, if I left that to the free market, would maybe just Volvo have done it and I would just opt to decide to do that? What if Volvo simply priced a little too high outside my, I'm like, well, I would like to buy it, but I just can't. So I'm going to have to settle for my Hyundai or something and just.
Yeah, you make a decision based on what's important to you, right? Like, I think that's the way it should be rather than governments. I understand what you're saying. And like, I think that, again, you can take something in isolation and say that. So I think that there's, you can certainly make a case for it and it's a reasonable case to be made, but it's like, it's like seatbelts in cars, like, I mean, I think people have a choice. And then, again, going back to another episode, smoking in clubs, like you have the choice to not go to the club. You have the choice not to buy like a car that seems like it's going to be more dangerous to buy. And then you have the sort of ingenuity of enterprise to say, well, guess what? We're going to have the beam. Here's an advertisement showing the difference between the two things. But I see what you're saying. It's like, what happens in the meantime? Where like, okay, great. What happens for the 20 years before that actually happens?
Yeah, so there's a time delay.
Yeah, a time delay.
And then I guess just the last bit, like on a more macro vision point of view, are countries that are more heavily regulated in this sense have a better quality of life for their citizens or worse? Like, for instance, I would assume Central Africa doesn't have much regulation. Mm-hmm. If you leave it just to the corporations that go in or whatever, I don't see much elevation in standard of living. True. But then to counter my point, you can go to like Russia during communism or China, which I'm sure they're far more regulated than we are. But then, to counter my point, it's one thing to have regulation, nothing to actually have efficient, what do you call it, like enforcement of regulations. Because we might say China's heavily, but I've heard, it's more like the wild, wild west. And if the government happens to catch you, then you're really in trouble. But for the most part, people do less regulation. You can actually fall like burden. Like if you have a few laws, there's more likelihood people will follow them. Once you actually put too many laws, it becomes such a spaghetti mess of what's going on that it actually doesn't do anything. So there is a balance there somewhere.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a balance. I think and that's always, I think even the pure libertarians sort of battle. It's always this. And I would say the socialists, I think that you get this, it's like a tug of war, and it's not that you necessarily would even want the, epitome of what that philosophy would bring. You want to tug things a little more in your direction and keep that battle going. I think the development of the iPhone really changed, well, it certainly changed how people acted, and it certainly affected them psychologically as well. But something that sort of was almost a corollary to that was the Arab Spring, which happened in, I think it was 2011 or 2012. I can never remember the year.
Maybe even slightly earlier.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe in 2010-ish.
I remember being in an airport when I saw like when it sort of was all happening.
I was
like
still living in Greece at the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it, yeah.
But yeah, so the Arab Spring was a big, it was really the democratization of the people, and like it's I think what was a beautiful moment in history, but I do think that it really sort of signaled to governments around the world that, because a lot of Western democracies did support a lot of the movements in the Arab Spring, but it was I think it kind of woke them up to the idea of what could be accomplished with these new technologies.
If it can happen there, it can happen here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that what the Arab Spring did, it really embodied what a lot of the sort of pioneers of the internet imagined that it could be, which was really a democratization of people really speaking with their voices and sort of challenging authority. But authority would see that, and
oh, for sure. Like, I think it was amazing in the sense, and to your point, I believe the part that terrified governments around the world was that we saw, and it's democracy in action, but it allowed those small, what they felt were small, marginalized voices to coalesce and organize themselves in a military-like precision.
yeah,
They could actually rival that which the nation state could now organize. So we could meet at this particular square and have a rally. Oh, they're coming? Okay, everybody, let's go to the next location. That didn't work? Okay, everybody, location 3. And you could literally move your populace around like a Roman phalanx.
yeah,
And how are you going to counter it? Shoot people? And if so, then you have blood on your hands, and you've lost the battle if you're the government at that point, right?
Yeah.
Unless you fall totally into totalitarianism. So that was absolutely amazing, and it was so empowering. I mean, and we saw even like how, to what degree, and this is what we're going to get into a little later, laws that are now being enacted to combat such movements.
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's emergencies acts and trucker rallies or whatever, these are still in essence the same energy. The small little guy saying, I don't want to be like this anymore, and I found other people like me. Let's go to location XYZ and show them in unison, this is not what I want to do.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that it was a real wake-up call. And I think since then we've seen a lot of the we've just started to see an acceleration. Again, I don't know if it's because of technology or because of these kind of movements. I don't know if it's because of technology or because of the governments of the world's reaction to technology. But you can really see a lot of these things. Like one thing I've noticed recently is how free speech is really almost used as a pejorative, where people would talk about freedom.
Dirty word now. Yeah.
It's incredible. Like, I never thought that would happen. Like,
neither did the founding fathers.
Yeah, or even, because freedom is just like, it's like part of our blueprint, like a part of our
You're
DNA.
singing it
right?
in the anthem, the land of the free. And now we're in 2020. Free comes with a cost.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's so self-centered.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's incredible. I mean, you've talked about mass formation before and sort of mass psychology, where like seeing it in action and seeing it sort of laid out before you like that, where the twisting of something as pure as freedom can be maligned. It's
couldn't be more Orwellian.
It couldn't be. And it's,
Are
it's
we in
almost
the
like a
beginning
movie.
of turning into Venezuela? Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries in the world, never mind Latin America. Mm-hmm. But coalescing around different ideologies led them to a completely different path. Like, you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
And I think we get disparaging sometimes about other countries here in the West, because like, oh, well, that would never happen to us. That's just the way the Chinese culture is. Latin America, it's always been a mess.
Yeah.
No, they're humans. We're no better than them. And what happened to them can certainly happen to us under the right conditions.
Yeah. Yep. No, I would agree.
It requires vigilance.
It does.
And, self-deprecation and being aware of hubris and just realizing like ultimate power corrupts ultimately, and be very careful of charismatic leaders that promise you everything, but very bait and switch.
Yeah.
The new normal, build back better. I was pretty happy with the old normal. And most of the world, like if you were to judge by immigration, was pretty happy with our normal too, because they were all knocking on the doors to move here.
Yeah.
So if it's really that bad, let's not have academics tell us how bad it is. Why don't we look at the people around the world who are democratically with their feet voting to come here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's something to the idea of always wanting to make things better, but we've talked about this before, but maybe I'll stop saying that because it feels like we touch on the same themes a lot of the time. So I'll just remove that phrase from the equation. But you get people because they're now on their phones all the time and so engrossed in the sort of the drama of everyday living, which is like being played out on various social medias all the time, that people are obsessing over this, obsessing over the small things, and it becomes a case of diminishing returns where, like we've talked about before, is you have people worrying more and more about almost fetishizing the iniquities in society, as opposed to kind of zooming out a little bit and looking at things more broadly and more, taking into consideration the fact that like there are other places that are a lot worse.
Technology has allowed us to zoom in on our own self-portraits with such microscopic precision that we're so obsessed by something wrong on a small portion of our face, as opposed to panning back and just looking at the overall gist that it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And in that small context, the analysis is correct. But the problem is then it's like you're almost like walking blind. Well, this is correct, and this is correct, and this is correct, without ever putting the pieces together and seeing the beauty of the giant. You walk down Manhattan and you just look at Times Square and you got to say to yourself, like, my God, like this really shouldn't exist. Think about the laws that are necessary, the people, the commerce, the technology, the building, the architecture, and yet it exists. And we're going to sit there and then like worry that really we need 4 divisions in our garbage recycling instead of 3 divisions. This is a horrible society.
Right.
And they could very well be right, but pan back a little bit and look in context of what you're actually critiquing.
Yeah. Put it in context.
Yeah.
We use Slack at my work as a messaging system, and I noticed this a while ago. I think I mentioned this before, but I think it was probably in one of these episodes, so I'll mention it again. But like how, there was a time I happened to be, like somebody will make a comment, then people will give the thumbs up or whatever. And, there's different skin tones for your thumbs up now, right? So there's various gradations of color you can make your thumbs up on Slack. So somebody's posting something about like, hey, this project was done, blah, blah, blah. And I noticed one time there's like 3 or 4 different skin tone colors, because sometimes you'll see it and you'll just click on the thing too, and it's just like, okay, also thumbs up. But people are taking the time to think, well, that skin tone doesn't necessarily represent me, so I'll do this skin tone. And then it's like, well, this one's a little off, like I'm not actually that. And it's like they're just what people are dedicating their brain power to is so crazy. I mean,
my whole thing, and much to my maybe my wife's she would disagree, but I really don't spend time or energy on things that don't really matter. Because just if you want to get to there's limited time and limited energy, so just really focus your mental horsepower on things that are going to fundamentally change what you're doing in life. And the color, you can put whatever color you want for my thumbnail. Thumbs up. I am not going to spend time thinking about that.
But maybe you would say maybe that is something that they would consider that matters to them, and maybe because you're white, the argument
you can give me a purple thumb.
I know, but
it's the energy that it represents that is my main concern. I'm supporting the person. They're happy. I'm happy. We're all in, agreement here. Move on. So I always go to the deeper, like what is the energy? What is the deeper meaning here? And that's what I'm focused on, and really nothing superficial. When I'm sitting there, for me personally, when I'm looking at, if I were to judge my skin tone of a thumbs up, that it doesn't get much more superficial than that.
Right. Yeah, I would agree, but I think that the argument would be made that you're saying that because you don't. You know what though? The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters for anybody who's like. I don't think there's like. I don't think this is. I think that people. Anyway, like I don't. So I think what it is. Like we used to have yellow. Like yellow used to be the thing. Like why
Sure.
don't can we just use yellow? You know what I mean? like use like The Simpsons and I think I can't remember Family
Like
Guy. Right?
personalizing
Like,
things is nice. I don't want to like disparage like the
yeah,
fact you
yeah.
personalize something. And it isn't like if my avatar all of a sudden had more features that were not the same as mine from a different ethnic group. I'd be like, okay, that really doesn't look like me.
Yeah, yeah,
But a
yeah.
thumb is more of a symbol than a representation of who I'm
Right.
supposed to be. So I chuck it in that sort
Yeah.
of category.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, I can even understand, if you're black and you want to have a black thumb, I get that. But if you're like what is with the one-off? Like, I just think it's kind of like just too much thought. Like, just when I looked at it that time, there's like 3 or 4 different thumbs. I'm like, is anyone even reading what the thing is? Like, is it just like you're spending more time thinking of the skin tone that you're going to use as opposed to the
Well,
content of the
in terms of
post?
prioritizing too, I've heard it said, it may have been Douglas Murray. While the enemy was amassing at the gates, we were more concerned, what gender are they?
Right. Right.
Like really, we have to prioritize things in life. If somebody wants to take the time to do that, it's their prerogative. Don't let me tell them what to do. But
Yeah.
I'm simply not going to think about that too much.
Yeah. I think
It's
that
not a
that's
priority.
little,
And it's not some form of privilege. We're like, well, of course, because everyone in your culture has the same color thumb. No, if I was in any other country in the world, I simply wouldn't care. And I'd hope the recipient of my thumbs up wouldn't be thinking about the color of my thumb either.
right, right.
There's greater issues.
So yeah, taking this into context, so we've got the the creation of the iPhone and the Arab Spring, and I think there were more events. The whole Trump phenomenon was something else. I think really showed the power of social media through the hands of somebody who like that his message was successfully conveyed, and by message I mean like that convoluted mess. There was no coherence really to his messaging at all, and yet he was still, followed by so many. I think he was in the right place and right time, and I think there's a whole well of potential kind of wanted to latch onto something that he kind of represented, but was. I think he executed it pretty poorly, but
Well, he's also the protest vote.
yeah, the protest vote.
And by being
yeah.
on Twitter, you're like the ultimate protester because you're just simply not going to go on CNN,
yeah.
which is like the legacy media.
Right, yeah, and he really did like for all, and I don't even think it was his press team. I think it was just him. Like I think it was just literally him on Twitter, and the fact that he was able to harness all that was whatever even the message that he was saying was not coherent. He still managed to do it. So you got to give props to that. Like he could harness that. He really harnessed that power, and I think other people sort of saw that. And well, think of the Clintons, for example. Like you take a look at that and be like, that's what we got beaten by. How did we like? I mean, you think of their generic message, but it's like,
Well, I know Hillary had to have like a pop star show up at her rallies to get anyone because nobody wanted to actually hear Hillary speak.
Yeah.
Which speaks to Hillary's blandness, and Trump, like people might just show up because he's a car crash waiting to see what weird thing he might do next. But I have to admit, even though I'm not a Trump fan, I think it could be quite disastrous if he becomes president a second time. The anarchist in me kind of enjoyed him winning for the first 15 minutes as I was watching it on TV, going, wow, we really saw the voice of the average citizen now be represented by something, perhaps the wrong thing, but despite all the press, legacy media pushing one way, it couldn't suppress the will of the people.
right.
And that in itself was a very beautiful thing. He might be the wrong conduit for such a thing. And, after you get over your first 15 minutes, like, my God, what have we done? But to your point earlier, it's really in the hands of the citizen.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the education system, too. Like, think deeply about your moves and the power of your vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I think that's if you look back at the 2010s, especially, it's just such a interesting time. Like the things have changed so much. Like we're just in such a different world now as we were, in the 2000s.
Men have babies.
Yeah. Biology has changed. So the whole point of this episode is that what we're seeing here is how the response to what is happening technologically, the governments of the world have reacted to this, and we are seeing a further sort of amplification of what has been picked up in the past, which is this kind of encroachment on the rights and freedoms of individual people. It's sort of like, entropy will persist nonetheless, but like let's fight while we can, and let's call out the things that we see starting to are really starting to become egregious pulls in the wrong direction.
Well, going back to Trump got elected through this sort of really direct democratic process via getting his message out outside of the realm of legacy media. You see the system push back against such a move by creating new laws,
right,
to help prevent, and that process will play out differently in each country. China, for instance, may be much more heavy-handed. Arab countries slightly different. They may just turn that sort of thing off. Here, we have a parliamentary process, and they pass bills and help kind of like, in their idea, help reintroduce more regulation around free speech. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Like, are you aware of it actually passed a couple months ago, Bill 100 here in Canada?
Remind me which one that
so
is.
Bill 100, it was passed in a stealth vote overnight. Like, you ask the average person here, and they don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And it was basically aimed directly at the trucker protest that we had in retaliation, let's say, to the trucker protest, to prevent further convoys. And it deals with like roadways, public infrastructure, and it is a broad and sweeping legislation that is really, the way it's written, is open for very wide interpretation. Long story short, with the Bill 100, like, police now may arrest individuals who defy police demands, just for defying the demands to cease activities, and can be fined up to $100,000 or 1 year in jail for each day they engage in a protest.
So was this pushed?
Can you imagine? Like, that's basically Emergencies Act type powers now downloaded to the province outside of the province of the Emergencies Act.
Yeah, like that's
$100,000 per day.
That's crazy. Like, that's so this did
that doesn't
come
get
out.
Totalitarian at that price point.
Yeah. Well, who can afford that?
Right.
Yeah.
So they might of course you can go and protest. You're just going to have to pay this bill.
Right.
Like, really?
Still, you're right.
I mean, I used to hear something to the effect, like in Iran, they're like, of course you can leave the country. You're just airfare out of the country is 1 year's salary.
Right, right.
It's really the same energy.
Yeah.
Heavy-handed centralization of preventing the average citizen from doing something against the state.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny because you'll get people trying to sort of sugarcoat that, to say like, well, because nobody wants to come off as completely totalitarian or completely like, you just can't do this, because then, people will then take that torch up and say like, look, what you're doing, it's just like what, the Huns used to do or whatever. Yep. But they will say like, sure, you can do whatever you want, but like, here are the caveats.
Yeah,
like,
off with your head. Yeah. And one of the interesting features of this Bill 100 too is like, they can actually arrest you before you commit a crime. So that really gets into some sort of a minority report sort of a.
In what context?
If the officers think you might, for example, block infrastructure, you can be arrested. You have not yet blocked infrastructure. Let's say you're on the way. Or you're on the way to Ottawa, or on the way to the Ambassador Bridge, and you have a vehicle of a certain size or weight or whatever, you can be arrested if they think you may do the crime.
Was this bill put together? This sounds like it grew out of that emergency.
It came after the truckers' protest, yeah.
Huh.
And it was voted in like one of those midnight stealth move. I think even certain MPs were totally notified, so they couldn't even vote against it.
Right.
That's quite something, right? So like nobody knows about this.
Yeah.
Check it out. Ontario, Canada, Bill 100.
Well, you get the next protest. Nobody knows about this. So you have people like, because if you're in the moment and you're about to protest and a cop comes up and you might even say like, I haven't done anything, like I can stand, it's my right to stand here, and be like, it's your right, but your fine's $100,000, right? A day.
Your right costs you $100,000.
Yeah.
And if we think you might do something wrong, well, there's a 1 year jail.
Yeah. That's
This is not
outrageous.
the Canada we grew up in.
So no, it's definitely not.
Right? Like this is like, and we're of age that we've lived on both sides of this change.
Yeah.
Really anybody under 30, because if we're talking about changes that happened in the last 10 years, the first 2/3 of their life would have been in a completely different context.
Yeah.
What their freedoms meant. Freedom is messy.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting to this sort of a Puritan centralization that like your freedom only exists as long as it doesn't hurt my right to.
Right.
And insert whatever the other person's right is. And therefore then freedom becomes then something juxtaposed to their needs or wishes, and therefore becomes like a weapon of sorts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I don't know. It's really unfortunate and infantilizing.
Infantilizing.
Yeah, it's not cool. There's more. Have you heard of the what was called Bill C-10? And it didn't make it through, and it came back as Bill C-11, and it's been passed.
I guess it was that extra digit that put it.
Yeah. Just let's just
we're never going to get this through with C-10.
Yeah, it's quite something, and it here we are, Jason. It directly affects us as podcasters and any content creator in Canada, and it basically what they're trying to do is regulate the internet, which is us broadcasting to the world. Not necessarily just Canadians. That's the beauty of it. Like we're not, we talk about Canadian subjects, but they are global in thought and affect all humans. If we're talking about diversity, we're talking about, getting this message out to everybody on earth.
So what does this law do?
Creating, basically, it's going to have the, all Canadian made internet content will be subject to the same rules as television, the CRTC.
Right.
But the CRTC was, there was a limited number of channels, so you could see why they had to create rules around that in its time and place. The internet is so democratizing, you don't need to have that anymore. To your point earlier, and this is where I'm congruent in thought with you, is like let the best ideas, let the free market decide.
Mm-hmm. Well, so just for like our American or other viewers or listeners, the CRTC is the Canadian Radio and Television Communication Commission Corporation.
Doesn't really
Incorporated.
Yeah,
LLC.
But it's a governing body that tells how much content for our American listeners and global. Like here in Canada, and a lot like our Netflix will have a different quantity of Canadian content and less American content, let's say, than Netflix in the States.
So, and just to put it in context, because the CRTC was beneficial in the sense of, for example, I think of like Canadian musicians. Like we're right beside the United States, so we have, overwhelmingly we get a lot of like people crave sort of American entertainment content, especially.
How much Bryan Adams can I listen to?
I know. So there's a lot of
I get
Brian
it.
and
So
Anne Marie.
yes.
I think was somebody else.
Yeah, like a certain percentage of all music radio stations play here must be from Canadian artists.
And there's a reason for that. Like it did help. I mean,
the internet has changed it all, though.
The internet has changed it all. Yeah.
Like it may have had its time and place. I'm sure those in the industry can argue that, but we're not in that time and place anymore. We're in the age of real like globalism information, and yet they're trying to now regulate that informational highway like legacy platforms like radio and television.
So
it's a very vague document.
Okay, but so if this is so, wouldn't this be a benefit to for example, our podcast, because we're competing? So that's basically saying, okay, Spotify or whomever, YouTube, you have to play more, 30% or whatever it is, Canadian content.
Sure. But if our content is deemed that, let's say we only talk about what's happening in the States all day long. It won't. So what the idea is the government won't go after you and I, but they will go after YouTube or whatever platform we're on to deprioritize us in our listings.
But wouldn't we be prioritized because we're Canadian?
No. It's based on, so we would have to have French, English, indigenous language content. Like who's doing that, right? We have to talk about Canadian content, perhaps, like, things that are pertinent to Canada. What if I don't want to talk about that? I want to have my message brought out to the whole world.
So they're not saying that. So they're not saying, for example, like YouTube, you have to play 30% Canadian content, full stop. It's YouTube. You have to play stuff that talks about Canada or talks about the Indigenous experience.
Yes, the content matters too.
Okay.
So it's not just where it's originating from; it's the actual content.
Okay.
So that really is, and they'll tell you we're not going after individual users, but they'll go talk to YouTube or whatever platform to deprioritize that which is not following the regulations. And it's written in such a vague way, you're not going to really understand if you've even been deprioritized until it's too late, let's say.
Yeah. Well, I think there's already, like, with all the algorithms, like YouTube and other companies like them are trying to, make money as they're a business, as they should. So they're trying to get the content, in principle anyway, they're trying to get the content that is most relevant to their viewers to them, so that they can, keep people watching, keep the
Let's
ads
say
going.
what we say is deemed not truthful.
Okay.
Even talking about this Bill C-11 may be deemed not truthful by the government, right? Mm-hmm. So like a central authority like the government cannot be the single arbiter of the truth.
I would agree with that.
Right? There was an interesting quote, I saw it the other day, by Dan Rather, and he was in support of John Snow. What's his name? Snowden?
Snowden?
Edward Snowden, yeah.
I always think of Dan Rather Not, or whatever. I don't know if that's like a Mike Myers
Dan Rather Not?
Yeah. It was something he did. Anyway.
Hold on. I'm going to actually pull it up, and I'm going to do one of these moves, because the quote was short, punchy, and exactly to the point, and I really didn't expect it from somebody like Dan Rather. Yeah, he said, it's better for the public to have too much information than none at all. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's coming from legacy media.
Right.
Right. So now we're talking about the internet. And so if I'm giving somebody like too much information, like, that's for the end user to decide, not for the government to step in and say, well, that's the truth. That's not the truth. Who the hell is the government to say what I'm saying is true or not?
Well, I'm just trying, I agree with you.
It's a governing body. There's academics around the world, scientists around the world. And if one doctor says you need a knee replacement and the government says, yes, you need a knee replacement, and another doctor's like, no, you can just get a rehabilitation. Is that going to be considered like a misinformation? Because the government has said so? It's just simply, it reminds me of the inefficiencies of communism, where simply a central governing body cannot be that efficient and know everything at all times.
Right, but I'm playing a bit devil's advocate here, because I know a bit about this bill, but I don't know. I think for the benefit of some of our listeners, I also want to get into the connection between, like, the bill itself sounds like it's just regulating, or it's sort of compelling digital service providers to play a certain amount of Canadian content. But who
type of content matters,
right? Who is the quorum though that is deciding what content it is?
I have no idea. Whoever the CRTC is,
right?
Don't they look at the actual content and decide?
But wouldn't
you'd have to get big enough to probably pop up on their radar in order for that to be worth their time. But just like China has an ideology, Canada has an ideology now. Mm-hmm. And it's a diversity, inclusion, equity ideology.
Right.
And if we start to say something outside of that ideology, you'll be deprioritized.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
Well, I wonder if it's a question of, like, it's prioritizing, for example, Indigenous stuff, but not necessarily deprioritizing things. If you don't talk about it, you're just not.
Sure, but the government cannot rule what is and is not information.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree that they shouldn't be messing with, like, the internet to me was the sort of last frontier of, like, here we finally have a place where you can be free and do what you want, and now things have certainly changed.
Imagine if this sort of bill existed, as you were saying earlier, in the Arab Spring context. Well, we're just going to have to deprioritize these messaging platforms because they are purveyors of misinformation.
Yeah, said
the government that was now on its way out because the people said enough of this.
Right,
like that's the gist of what can potentially happen. Of course, I'm talking about things further on in the future, but not necessarily, because how much misinformation did we see from the CBC and the government in Parliament regarding the Emergencies Act application for the truckers.
Yeah.
Complete misinformation.
Right.
Money's coming from the States and the Nazis and racists. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
I saw every shape, size, and color of person there wonderfully participating their democratic right to protest. And so the government's going to come along and say, well, if you talk about that in a certain context or don't talk about it in a certain context, we're just going to deprioritize you.
Yeah.
I mean, the document is written that vague. They now have that power.
That is the problem I have with a lot of Canadian laws, and I would single out Canada here. Like I don't know enough about other laws in other countries, or even Canadian law. But like I just know playing poker, for example, online poker. I used to play it all the time, but it was like I wanted to not, I wanted to make sure I was on the right side of the law, like for various reasons. Like,
Sure,
if I'm taking
of course.
money out
Yeah,
and it's like, am I going to get my money seized? And I thought, I tried to research it, and I, for the life of me, could not find anything black and white. And you could talk to a lawyer, and they'd say the same thing, and it'd be like, yeah, like you'd probably be okay in some of these instances. It's like always vague, always like nothing concrete, nothing like you can or you can't do this.
Yeah.
So I think that there is
Those are
this
written
way.
on purpose sometimes, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Instead of saying, when you walk on the sidewalk, this is illegal, it'd be like, if you walk on the sidewalk.
Right,
like,
right.
And that's where you get that gray zone, right?
Yeah.
You ever look at an insurance policy and try to figure out does this actually cover me if I get sick?
Right, right.
Like
Yeah,
try to
yeah.
work your way through.
Yeah.
There's so much grayness there. In the end, for me personally, like you don't let power determine information.
Yeah.
Power should not determine information. People can decide. And if there's different academics and professionals that are, getting a following, then that's the democratic process playing out right in front of your eyes. Who is the power to step in and say, this is right and this is wrong?
Yeah.
And as we've seen with Trudeau far too much here in Canada, he has no issue with interfering, whether it's the RCMP or the Attorney General and all these sorts of nature. So power can interfere with actual truth.
Right.
That's why I think this podcast that we have and that we're starting, and it's been fantastic. And just the whole underlying mechanism of what the internet can provide is much more the spirit of what it can provide in the best case scenario is that which is a deregulated, open market of ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. And you still see that sort of strangulation happening where you have, like, especially during COVID, like it was really pronounced where a lot of people were silenced, and even people who had, science on their side, they had, even people who were just asking questions about it, like, would be silenced. And it's really a dangerous.
Let me
thing.
put it more like, 'cause I'm sure people that are more on the left side of the spectrum will enjoy this sort of Bill C-11. But let me ask them this. If Donald Trump had the ability to regulate the internet, would they be happy?
Right.
Because just because it happens to fall on your side of the philosophical leaning,
Right.
you're then okay with such a law. You have to imagine if this sort of framework got into the hands of those who you disagree with.
Right.
And then realize it's not whether you agree with them or disagree with them is the issue. It's the fact that it's the framework that you're erecting around you that is the issue.
Yeah.
And if such framework falls into the hands of those that you disagree with, what do you do then? And inevitably what you do is you create a situation which empowers yourself, the individual, and then let democracy take the form it wishes to take.
Yeah, you would hope that would be the template for a lot of people. Like, it always comes back to those first principles, and you can't be blinded by sort of ephemeral choices in whatever the current trend is to like, think of the gun law thing again, where it's like you may not want a gun, you may not want anybody to have a gun, but keep in mind what you're allowing is the government to take back some rights from some people that they used to have, and see how that will now sort of propagate to other places. And just like the earth getting, all the mountains getting ground down, you're getting this homogenization where soon you're not left with very many options anymore. And I know that a lot of people listen to this and be, well, it's a big stretch for like guns or whatever, but it's just an example, right? So it's anyway. So what do we have?
There's so many new laws, and this is the problem. And they all tend to trend in a singular direction,
Right.
Which is a direction around an ideology set by the prevailing government, and therefore through such ideology, restricting any means for the average citizen to go against such ideology.
Yeah.
So these were the C11 and Bill 100 are more like frameworky. And then you have the one like Bill what is it called again? Bill C67, which is more about promoting the actual ideology. And the thing with Bill 67 is that it's trying to promote the absence of racism. And that's wonderful. You know, there's who wants racism? I certainly don't. And I know you don't. The problem is that, you know, for instance, like performance appraisals, you know, shall include competencies based on, if it's teaching, a teacher's level of anti-racism awareness.
Yeah. Well, it comes back to the whole like CRTC quorum thing. Like, who are these people that are deciding what is, you know, anti-racist?
Like, teachers must take anti-racism training,
right?
As if you need to be trained to not hate somebody because of their skin color.
Yeah.
Like, how far are we going into this?
Oh, and you know, we could go down a whole. I mean, we did a whole podcast on this kind of thing, but it's like, it is one of the more insidious things, because you can always look at the top level message and say, well, that's great.
Sure.
Who wouldn't want to obliterate racism or whatever? Yeah. And it's like, you can't do that. Like, there's always going to be racist. There's always going to be like people, like, we are still human beings. We're always going to have some bias toward other people that don't look exactly like us. And we can always
be aware of it, of course, and train yourself. But when you get to too much training, it becomes ideological.
Yeah, and I think that
really should be just boiled down to a simple, you just don't do things to people based on their skin color in a negative way.
Yeah. Well, I think that also the vast majority of people don't. Like, they might have little prejudices here and there, but I think it's kind of like, you know.
And it's prejudice not just on skin color. What neighborhood do you come from? What,
exactly.
You know, what's
people
your education level?
Like,
what kind of car do you drive?
Yeah.
Well, look, your highlights, they're terrible.
Yeah.
Like, people make judgment calls.
People are little bitches. Yeah. You always have like, there's always something that they're going to find.
Drinking Tim Hortons. I have Starbucks.
Yeah, right.
If you want to get at it, people will auto-divide themselves and make judgment calls on all these little nuances all the time.
Yeah.
And none of them are good, of course. But what it really boils down to is a set of policies radically left in their orientation. And there will be punishment for the failure to adopt the stance. Mm-hmm. That's not open. That's not democratic. That's not organic. You know? Right. And this is where I get like a more libertarian again. Like, just let people be. You know, racism is not allowed. Mm-hmm. We don't need equity. We have equality. And we make sure that everything is dealt out in a equal opportunity sort of way, and then let merit stand.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I find the whole, I really do find the anti-racist stuff just appalling. Like, there's something about it that is just so rotten in nature. And I've had, I've talked before about like this, like, sometimes like I've had meetings or whatever where those kinds of things have popped up, and it's just it's so cringe inducing, because it's like, it's coming usually from the people. I have a real problem, I think, with people who are relatively privileged as it is, like talking about a whole subset of the population.
Oh, it's another way of talking down on people. Like, I am anti-racist. You're not. Therefore, you must be more racist than myself. And it's just a way of self-grandizing again.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, because you hear anti-racist and the average person like, oh, sure. But there is a difference between anti-racism and non-racism. Like, they sound the same, but they're actually quite opposite. Like, non-racism means non-racism, which is the old way that you and I grew up with, is that simply race does not matter.
Yeah.
You're human, I'm human, welcome to the team, let's go. Anti-racism insists that your race is fundamentally important. So being white means you are privileged and racist.
Right.
You, by default, if you take an anti-racist stance, you are calling white people racist.
Well, that is also a racist stance, like, to take that, because you're being racist against, like, I mean, because it doesn't take into consideration, a plethora of other things like socioeconomic status. Like, not every white person is born into privilege.
And therefore, not to be called a racist if you're a white person. Like, well, then of course I'm anti-racist, because I don't want to be called out as a racist person.
Right.
Because by definition, you're saying if this is what it is. If I'm white, I must be racist.
Yeah.
So then I'm so behind anti-racism because I do not want to be called racist.
Yeah.
How about you just non-racist?
Right.
The old, Martin Luther King, judge a person by the content of their character. It's
Yeah.
so simple in thought. And I really wonder what he would say if he was sitting here with us right now.
It's, I mean, yeah, it's a real, it seems like a real no-brainer.
No, there's just, not to dwell on them too much, but there's also the infamous Bill C-16, which is what made Jordan Peterson famous 4 or 5 years ago now. And, the whole point of that one was for the first time in Canadian history, as far as I can tell, was compelled speech.
Yeah.
Like you're actually putting into legislation, you must use these words.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, and that was mostly about, for him, was that the
I believe
pronouns?
it was pronouns.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And, if again, I've had, just like you, friends of all shapes, sizes, and colors and sexes all our lives, but I just prefer, a one-on-one sort of organic basis rather than it being some sort of legislative thing,
You know what that reminds me of is, and I told you this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's apropos. But when I was a kid in school, I used to play soccer a lot, and I had this thing where I wanted people to call me Ace. Like I wanted that to be sort of my nickname, and it never really caught on. I had like Ace and like Firefox for whatever reason before the browser, but and I just went through phases of which one I liked better. But the Ace one was like people knew that I wanted to be called that, but like nobody would just call me Jason or whatever. Like,
were you offended?
Or yes, I was. No, but but what was funny is like in soccer when when I would have the ball,
you'll always be Ace to me.
Oh,
Don't worry.
That's sweet.
Yeah, got a tear in my eye.
When I would have the ball in soccer, they'd sort of cue in to, like, if they wanted me to pass it to them, they'd be like Jason over here, Ace over here, Ace, and so it kind of got me thinking like, and then of course I would try and reinforce them positively by passing it if it the situation.
So when
warranted.
they needed you, they called you Ace.
Exactly. But it's sort of, I always think of that when we start talking about like, compelled pronoun usage, where it's like, does it matter what people are calling you? Look, I mean, it's a whole thing getting into that. And I find, it's not that I don't understand that some people don't necessarily identify with, the gender they were assigned at birth or whatever, but we have to make things easier for society to be able to, like, is it like...
There's an equilibrium to society. There's a sort of like a established norm of doing things. Mm-hmm. And I'm not against change. I just think the change has to come organically, and people, if it's a good thing, it will settle into society the way it should. But coming down top heavy through the legislation just feels forced, ideological, and fake. Yeah,
like I agree completely with that. Like it really is all about how organically something evolves. Like if you have, and saying nothing about like, again, the government kind of trying to force something down people's throats. But I have no problem on a personal level if somebody comes up and they said, I prefer to be called X. I prefer to be called Ace even, it's like, mm-hmm. I'll probably call you Ace. Or mm-hmm. like if you want to be called, well, not Ace because that's my name, but if somebody wants to be called, somebody looks, to me for all intents and purposes that they're a man and they want to be called female. Or for example, if they are, they wish to be referred to as a they, them, okay, like I can give them that on a personal level.
Maybe we should all just be they.
Sure, we'll just make things confusing.
Polite plural. Yeah. French, a lot of languages have the polite plural.
Yeah, they
when
do.
In doubt, they.
Yeah, that is sort of a good when in doubt, because more and more people there's more of an androgynous look these days to some people, or at least I feel like. More and more often, I'm seeing people that I can't readily identify. That I'm like, oh, it's a man or it's a woman. It's like, okay, I'm not sure. And in that case, say they.
Are they an ace or not an ace? Jay, you present as an ace. I will call you an ace.
I think that but I do think that on a personal level, if somebody does that, I have no problem doing it. I don't even care, somebody new comes to, where I work or something, and they're like, human resources, like, this person prefers being called this. It's like, okay, I don't have a problem. Like, I'll call them whatever they want to be called, but don't tell me that I have to. Maybe even at work,
well,
it's like,
you're choosing to play with their fantasy, let's say, their reality, mm-hmm. but you don't want to be legislated into that choice.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like saying, if somebody has sort of, maybe somebody is like, for example, Maestro. Think of Seinfeld. That guy liked to be called Maestro. It's like, okay, the guy's a conductor. He likes to be called
Yeah.
Maestro. We can call him Maestro.
Yeah.
But like when you're talking about him, do you still refer to him as Maestro? Is like he's
And
not.
if you don't, will be considered hate speech.
Yeah, or but then you get
You know,
somebody who's like I forget that.
quite something, eh?
What was
Yeah.
that? Well, it's just you can. It's a lot of. It's like when two ideologies kind of clash, you really have to, I think, opt for the one that doesn't compel people to do something.
Good point. Good point. And why is that?
Because as little as possible, we shouldn't be compelling people. Like ultimately, the freedom of the individual should be the default position.
I think it's Darwinism of social norms.
Yeah.
Like if it's selected for as an advantageous trait, we will adopt it and keep it. It shouldn't have to be like higher down powers telling us this is what this is divine intelligence, and I will intelligent design, and I will design your pronouns for you, sort of thing.
Right.
Like, just let it stick. If it's meant to be, it'll stick.
Yeah, and like there's something to be said for like etiquette and for like, like somebody wants to be called something else. I might not agree with, like because it's, there are biological realities despite what people will say, right?
course.
And if you're not a woman and you want to be called a woman, then I can even play ball with that, but you can't compel me to play ball with that
Well,
because
it becomes then, just sorry to cut you off, but I do feel like this is my crux, my issue, is that if I present as a he, him, and I have a gender masculine name, and we live in a society where that's considered a male thing, you can probably take a guess, and if you're wrong, I'll let you know. But
Right,
why
right.
do I have to? It's almost like a proclamation. Like, I believe in this ideology, and I will also put my pronouns down. It's not an ideology to me. It's just simply I'm a he, him. There's standardized norms over thousands of years of what that looks like in our society, and take a shot at it. And if you're wrong, and I am wanting a different pronoun, I will let you know, and you better be nice to me. If not,
Yeah.
there may be repercussions,
Right,
sort of
right.
thing. And that's just how people deal with things, right? But I wouldn't want that person to have to be legislated into my pronoun.
yeah.
Like I also wouldn't want them to be like, you better call me a he or him, otherwise,
Right, right.
like they actually, you're free to call me whatever you want. I just may not like you,
Yeah.
and then just move on.
Yeah, there's always needs to be a difference, and we've talked about this before, where it's like between sort of what's required by law and what is sort of social etiquette.
Yeah.
And as long as that kind of thing remains within the realm of social etiquette, then I don't really have a problem with it. Like I might have some personal feelings about it. I might think of somebody a little bit differently because I might not agree with like how they're seeing the world or
Well,
whatever.
somebody
but
may
it's-
argue, just to be fair and take the other way, but why the need to put this into law?
Right.
Does social etiquette not go far enough? Does it move too slowly? Perhaps. But you can educate people without having to make it law.
Yeah.
You can have biology class or gender normative studies or whatever they call it these days. And inform people. That's fine. And of course tolerance should be widely talked about and pushed. You don't have to agree with somebody not to be still polite to them.
Yeah.
But to be it's just funny. I saw this thing. It was some sort of meme like. We used to just call it, how did it go? I identify as used to be just called I pretend to be.
Right. Yeah.
You might identify as a different gender, but there are chromosomes XXXY,
Yeah.
and that is your biological assignment.
Yeah, you might not like it, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, that's
And you can
true.
go over every transformative surgical intervention. Your genes will still be what you were given at birth. And yes, there's sometimes some weird like XXY and that, but that's such a small fraction of a fraction.
Yeah.
The vast majority fall into XX or XY.
Yeah. And like, I think it's funny because you get into this nebulous ground where like, I think that people should be respected. I think there are people like a lot of people have like mental illnesses, for example, that are like, they need to have, there needs to be some tolerance for the way that other people sort of
kindness.
see the world. And I'm not even necessarily talking about gender dysphoria. I'm talking about like anything like, people who are schizophrenic, like, if you have somebody who's schizophrenic and they're, hearing voices and they're like, but they're, they're taking their medication and everything, but they're still a little off. You don't call out that, or you don't, you try to kind of like just be kind to people and compassionate. So it's like
under all circumstances. Well, you're not so sporty, you nerd. Like things like why would you do that to anybody?
Yeah,
just let them be who they are.
Yeah, But then it does. It's kind of like I always have this. I don't know if you have this problem, but like I want to be, for example, if I see a homeless person on the street and I see, like, we'll be driving and, my partner will be like, she's very, like sympathetic, and we'll be like, oh, like that poor person. And I'm like, sometimes I'll see them and be like, well, they look like they're on drugs, so I don't really feel that bad about it. But it's like our default positions. But I think about it and it's like, how do I know how do I know that they aren't? And of course, my girlfriend will say like, well, even if they are, well, I
think a huge percentage of them do have like mental health issues, and that's why they do end up on the street.
Yeah, and well, the position also will be like, my partner, I don't know if I should say her name because she's never really said I could, so I'm trying not to. Okay. But like, she'll say, well, even if they're on drugs, that's an illness too. And I'm like, well, no, it's not. Like, so it's like,
it was a free choice.
You want. But you start getting into that thing. So it's like, okay, well, what degree of compassion should I have for this person?
You pay your taxes, right? We live in a good country that, those facilities for those people do exist through our taxation.
Right. Yeah.
It may not be a direct form of help.
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah, that's I agree. That's sort of the stance I mostly take on that kind of thing. But it's like, if I do see somebody and it's like, I can sort of prove to myself that they're mentally ill, I can't help but feel more compassionate toward them, right? Like,
my father said once, and he's like a tough-nosed sort of Greek immigrant guy, but he's a really soft guy too. He's like, if I ever win the lottery one day, I'm just going to go around to every homeless person on the street and give them a bottle of wine. Because let's not pretend this is what you want. And he's like, it's a kind of a cool way of thinking. He's like, I'm just going to accept you as you are.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to try to make you happy. And, and it may actually be hurting them long term, but he's not thinking about it. He's like, today I made you happy.
Today he dines, you know what I mean? Like and
I think it's just a really kind way of looking at something,
Yeah.
But yeah, I am with you. Unfortunately, I feel like I don't give enough to homeless people on the street in general. Maybe it's an age thing now, but I just feel like I feel worse for not doing it.
I always feel like I don't want to be taken. Like I always feel...
Shaky Lady. Remember Shaky Lady?
Yeah, Shaky Lady.
I know.
This is a person, for those of you, well, she would... well, I don't know. Anyway,
professional scam
artist. Yeah. And she took a lot of people for a lot of money. She was apparently living in a nice condo somewhere. And it was like... I don't know. I don't like that. And
what percentage of people on the street are actually scam artists versus mental health?
Yeah. But I think, there are certainly a lot of, unfortunate people out there that are, I feel like we're living in an age where there should be some coordinated effort. I always thought this would be a great idea, is like somebody, how they give at restaurants, they'll give you that thing when your dinner is ready. They'll give you a thing and be like, oh, go away to the bar. This thing will start, acting like a UFO when it's, if they had something like, so they seem really cheap to manufacture is my point, is like they seem to be able to make a lot of these. Can't they make something and almost distribute them at homeless shelters where it's like somehow tied into some sort of account for them, so that like if somebody wants to give them money via like Interact, that they kind of do something like that.
I always thought if I was a bum on the street, I'd have like a little QR code set up. Who's carrying change on these days? Just tap.
No, I know that's a problem a lot of the times, right? It's like you just don't have any like.
No, it's actually a real thing these days. You know, and if actually be quite novel. What, I just have to tap my phone and feel good about myself, and you just help people as tap as you walk down Queen Street.
Yeah, I just need a Bitcoin address. It's just like,
well, there you go even deeper. Yeah, I agree with you. It's probably always going to be with us.
Yeah,
that problem.
Anyway, so that's a digression.
Well, sure. And going into this, but we touched on it here. There's another bill too called Bill C-36, which it's proposed but not passed yet. But it's going in. It's exactly what we were talking before. Like your tweets can be considered hate speech.
Yeah,
like that. So this is where it just really like. Do we really need to be like nanny state to that degree?
Well, so what is this one? Because that's so. How is that even? Okay, so this is a. I guess that you could use that in, somebody could accuse you of doing it, and if you're a Canadian citizen, then you're like, I could accuse you as like, well, Dimitri tweeted this, and I'm
what if an absence of a statement becomes hate speech? Like like you show your black square sort of vibe. I didn't do it today. That's hate speech.
Right.
Like you can really like this is there's no end to it really. If you want to get into legal speak, you can go almost anywhere with it. Yeah, the way they look at it is like preventing hate is likely a justified infringement on free expression.
Yeah.
It's
I feel
terrible.
I almost feel like I don't have anything meaningful to contribute to this debate because I'm just slack-jawed at how, like, I'm like, really? That's where we're at?
Yeah.
Like, legislating, like, hate speech, like what, because of course it's like, first of all, I think you should be able to say whatever you want. Like, I just don't think I don't think that the having, I think, again, socially, you should obviously be careful. You should be kind and compassionate, but I don't think ever the government should come into it, because you start to get into situations that are subjective or are contextual.
Well, what is a government? It's just a ruling body. They're supposed to all of a sudden be the arbiters of like what is a proper moral conduct.
Right.
It's quite something.
Coming from people,
really?
coming from a prime
Why don't you tell
ministers
somebody
in
that in the
blackface all the
Philippines or
time.
Venezuela? Like the concept is you're giving the government, whatever, we might say we have a good government today, but it may not be a good government tomorrow, but you're still offloading that responsibility to an external apparatus. I think it's not, what makes a good society is strong, self-actualized, independent citizens, of which then they vote for small governments that do precise and organized things.
Right.
Not the other way around.
What do you think of Pierre Poilievre? How do you say Poilievre?
Yeah, I don't know. I always like prime ministers with the name Pierre. I have a little. What do I think? I hope he's the real deal. You never know anymore.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, he comes off as, I know some people would say that this is all a show and this and that, but he
Good
comes
cop,
off
bad
as,
cop.
Yeah, like I think it's kind of like he saw a market almost to be like, well, Bernier wasn't exactly like lighting the world on fire with his, and I think Bernier, frankly, with a lot of his stuff has gone a little, what the biggest problem I have with Maxime Bernier is his bloody social media. I think whoever, whether it's him doing it or he's just too far, and he comes off as so disingenuous now. And it's like, I was rooting for the guy at the beginning.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's almost like, obviously I'm against anti-climate change and 100%.
It's never
absolute.
nuanced. Yeah. And it's just this like clickbait stuff. And it's just, I've really been turned off by it. But Pierre comes off well. I listened to him on Jordan Peterson and a few other places, and he comes off well. I'm hoping. I mean, certainly he would. I would vote for him in a heartbeat against Trudeau. Like it's a no-brainer. But like, but
I'm a classical liberal, and I'm experiencing political homelessness.
Right.
If I were to prioritize our issues at the moment, it's all these regulations that we're getting into, which is government encroaching on, the normal everyday existence to the point of what words you use, right? Yeah. So for me, this is like in top 1-2 category of like DEFCON 5. We're in big trouble here.
Right, yeah.
So would I like to see nurses paid more? Yes. Would I like to see the hospitals better funded and more better organized? Yes. Is that number 1-2 issue right now? Even a pandemic? Unfortunately, for me, no. That may be issue 4 or 5 down the list. I have another 2-3 things. So all of a sudden, I'm feeling myself almost gamed into going more right wing than I really feel comfortable with. Yeah. Because those issues are just taking more of the center stage to me. What's the point in having a perfectly run healthcare system if the country you live in compels you to have speech? Mm-hmm.
No,
if China had the most perfect education and healthcare system, do you still want to live there? Right. I don't. So therefore, those things matter more to me, and I think they matter more for a healthy, functioning society. You can fix the other things, healthcare and education. Yeah. If you start to go down the road of compelled speech and giving tickets for in case you may cause a crime, where the hell are we going? Mm-hmm. Right? So for me, I'm all ears now with Pierre, going back to your point. I hope he's the real deal. What I love about him is that he actually stands there and will openly debate you on the spot, and he knows his stuff. Yeah. Right? You may disagree, but the other Pierre used to do the same thing. Pierre Trudeau, he would, you stop him on the street, you debate him, he would turn around and argue with you. Right or wrong, at least the man knew his stuff, believed in it, and could articulate it to an extent that you at least fully understood the amount of nuance and the direction they were going in. And then you can decide as an individual whether it was for you or not. So I hope he's the real deal. I've heard he's not part of the WEF. So that's kind of like almost a de facto starting point for me these days, unfortunately. Yeah. But the World Economic Forum is a real thing. Like, here's the thing with conspiracy theories. They have a website. They openly tell you what they want to do, and they are doing it. So there's nothing really conspiratorial about that. Corporations conspire all the time. You are a chocolate factory and you wish to buy another company, or we will conspire until we take a hostile takeover. This is the natural order of business on Earth. And I think that they've almost done a very clever game. They're just simply putting it out there in front of your eyes, like the hide it in plain sight sort of thing. Whether it goes into digital IDs and things we can get into later. But yeah, Pierre, I don't think he would exist if it wasn't for Maxime Bernier. Meaning, the energy that Maxime Bernier was able to create some, 9 to 11% in the previous election?
Vote.
Yeah, that's not a small number of people.
Yeah.
And that helps, that conversation, which would be considered extreme right here in Canada, now is being legitimized and being brought into one of the three main parties in Canada. And who knows, those ideas may become even considered centrish in 10 to 15 years from now. So, that which was once a left-wing idea becomes centrist, right-wing idea can become centrist. Your whole spectrum can shift all over the place. Like, are you going to tell me today that the Liberals today aren't acting like the NDP of 25 years ago?
Right.
Like, I don't even see a difference really between the NDP and Liberals.
Right.
So I'm happy for Maxine coming onto the scene. And an offshoot of that branch of thought is Pierre. And at this moment, Pierre, is her name Lewis? The other one that's running for leadership of the Conservative Party, the black woman, I believe she's an attorney. And then there's also,
I know
and she's big. And then there's also she's very, 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 she's got great points and very articulate, and feels like the real deal.
Yeah.
And then you got Roman Baber, and all three of them.
Roman Baber?
Roman Baber is probably what we considered in third place to be leader of the Conservative Party.
Okay.
He was part of the party, and I believe he was kicked out, and now he's running. He did an independent thing, and he's always the one that's standing up in Parliament, still telling people, lockdowns are bad and everything else. He's one of the few as an independent.
Yeah.
So now he's trying to become now leader of the Conservative Party. But those three individuals, Lewis, Baber, and Polyev, are all basically campaigning on defunding the CBC. Wow.
Yeah.
And then Charest is saying, we won't defund it, but we will reform it. So this is showing you how much people are upset with the state media in Canada in the last 2 years due to COVID.
Yeah.
That you have the top 4 candidates of the Conservative Party saying, we need to do something about information.
Yeah.
And now you contrast that with Trudeau and the Liberal government creating all these laws, basically saying, we're the only arbiters of truth. You either come to us or it's all misinformation. We got quite something brewing here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting. And it's interesting. Even Charest is kind of like equivocating, where it's like, okay, well, we'll maybe, we'll rethink the whole CBC question. But it's funny when you contrast that with, like, I guess the whole, Andrew Scheer, Aaron O'Toole thing. The Conservatives are like, you know what, we gotta think outside the box here, because
maybe
it's like, be more authentic, or I don't know. I just think of O'Toole and Scheer and just the way they were such bland, boring, it's like you might as well have a bot. They were the Hillary Clintons of Canada, and, well, except the massive corruption. But although who knows? But
corporate, completely
just corporate. Yeah. Just like I just won't say anything.
Did you see how many new what would you call it, memberships have been taken up by the Conservative Party? 600,000 new memberships.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so the reason is, I could get this wrong. Is it the members that vote on who becomes the...
To my knowledge.
Right. So most people are saying those people signed up to make sure Pierre Poilievre becomes the leader of the Conservative Party. 600,000 people who actually want to put money down and sign up to have a vote on who runs the party is a huge sum in a country of 37 million.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know what the membership... I think they have a total of 675,000. So they, 12 times they increased their memberships because of to vote on this.
Right.
That is showing the desperation that so many Canadians are feeling right now.
Yeah.
That they don't have any representation.
Right.
On the federal level.
I think I think the truckers' protests had a lot to do with this. I think the sentiments were all there, but the truckers' protests kind of catalyzed this to be like, you know what, we can change things if we really want to. And how they
just maligned them in every way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then
everything the government said about them was a lie. What the CBC said about them was a lie. And then people are online And that's why we have these new bills that we're talking about, reading interesting things from intellectuals from different universities and professors and journalists going, okay, let me decide for myself. This is what it's all about. Going, okay, why have I never heard even a conversation, let's say during COVID, about all you heard from the CBC during COVID was, is the government doing enough?
Right.
You never heard the CBC go, should they even be doing this?
Yeah.
Is this the right thing? What science is behind this? Can we have a 1 hour conversation?
Yeah.
So you take that, you take it into the truckers. People are desperate for more information, quality information, and something that's so not ideologically tied.
Right. Yeah, it's you really also have to think of the balls on Trudeau, like on that whole government of being like, I mean, we're right next to the United States. We're right, like, who does, like, this is one thing if this is happening in some third world, like, or even a country like Iran. Okay, they're pretty isolated out there. Like, they're a pretty powerful company, especially regionally. And, there's a lot of people in Iran. So, like, for them to come out with something like this, you can almost see, okay, they have the sort of military might and they can sort of control the message to some extent. Yeah. But we're right next to the U.S. There's like all the media, we're getting all the same stuff. You can't really, like, there's people going across the border all the time. Like how do you think you can shut down Canada to such a degree, unless the U.S. is also sort of sucked into this whole thing? But like, if this wasn't happening under Biden, and I don't think that you're not really seeing, I think, like, for all the sort of mismanagement or incompetencies or whatever you want to say of the Biden administration, I don't think that you're seeing the dramatic shift to the left that we thought. Like, I sort of thought things were going to be a lot worse, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, Americans, I don't know what it was, like 16% or something approval rating.
Right.
But you're right. As a corporation, Biden didn't all of a sudden become what they were fearing, like usurped by the radical left.
Right. Yeah. I think that was the big fear. And I mean, certainly you can look at the economy and sort of roll your eyes, but like, but I don't think, like, I don't understand where Trudeau sort of thinks he's going to get any kind of, it was like having the message, everybody else is starting to, get away with stop with the vaccine mandates and everything. And then they're still going hard in the other direction. Like, who did he think was going to support him? Like, it's just a small country.
Well, it shows you the echo chamber I think the Liberals are in. They think they have the ideological high ground. Right. And they have the audacity to tell us, like, we know the correct moral path and we'll legislate it. Yeah. Quite frankly, I think people have had enough of it. He's completely fake, and it pains me to say that because I was a fan of his father's. And it's just, I don't mind if I disagree with someone. Just don't lie to me and don't be fake.
Yeah.
That's the key features.
I just can't believe he's won 2 elections. And I mean, some of it speaks to, like, the first one I can...
3, actually. Because he beat Scheer, he beat O'Toole, and he beat Harper. In a short number of years.
You're right, yeah. So, like, I can, and I can see the first one where he beat Harper in the sense of, I can see the population. We've talked before about the population was looking for a change. It was kind of like off of, you had the Obama thing, and that was kind of like almost riding that wave. So I was like, okay, well, I mean, I never voted for him. Just always want to say that. But
I'll never ask you.
But you can kind of see how he would have gotten in. Yeah. But then the second time, and then the third time, I mean, aside from having extremely weak candidates from the PCs, it's like just incredible that
it was more the PCs lost it, I think. And I'm not quite sure about this fact, but out of the 150 years of Canada being a country, like a huge percentage of those years, we've been a liberal country.
Yeah, that's true.
So just by the sheer roll of the dice, you're going to get a liberal
and the
government.
the branding of the Liberal Party.
Although, what did you think of his haircut? Have you seen his haircut?
Trudeau. Oh yeah. Yeah, what is that?
It's
I did
quite
see
something
different.
Yeah, it's not badly done. I'll critique it, but it's way too short. And what I find really funny, though, from a hairdresser's like perspective sort of thing, is everybody was saying he looks just like Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber. Mm-hmm. And it is quite pretty much the same haircut. But it's also the same haircut Russell Crowe had in Gladiator.
Right.
But nobody seemed to put Trudeau into the Gladiator category. Right. Everybody unanimously kind of went the Dumb and Dumber route. Technically, it's the same haircut.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of shows, like, if the Conservatives can put together a strong platform that feels, I think we're on the verge of a bit of a revolution here. I think woke has overplayed their hand in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And quite frankly, people have had it. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed the wind shifting as well. Thank God.
Like, do you want a digital ID? Did anybody
Well,
ask me?
I think the digital ID thing goes beyond woke. I don't think that the woke thing I look at
Yeah,
as
but it goes with the
relatively-
climate change and to do the right thing for the world. And we're going to put down a heavy
those-
bureaucratic system around it.
I would say those are different because I would say that there's
How?
well, okay, so first of all, wokeism is absurd.
Aren't they both leftist, though?
Well, they are both leftists.
And
but it
leftist
doesn't-
is centralized?
yes.
Okay.
But I'm not saying, I'm just distinguishing between the two. So like,
Yeah.
I think that wokeism, more has to do with identity politics to me.
Okay.
And like, this anti-racism and stuff like that.
Sure.
Whereas I think the idea of sort of centralized digital IDs is a much more serious danger. Like
Okay.
I think that wokeism is almost laughable. Like I never thought it would last. Like I always thought, okay, eventually people are going to get tired of this. It
Okay, I
obviously
see your
doesn't make
point.
sense.
One is exceedingly permanent in nature.
Digital IDs or something, and that kind of you would throw technology into it, and you see that like that is something that has a momentum of its own, and if it keeps catching on, it will go further. And I see less resistance to that. Like I see.
What if your
because that
digital
comes with
ID every morning?
convenience.
What if you turn it on every morning and it tells you, "Can you please confirm your pronouns for today?" That you've combined the two,
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised.
and it will automatically auto-populate all your contacts with your newest update of your pronouns.
Yeah. I honestly think if we're talking, 50 years in the future, even, I don't think it's going to be anything. I think we're going to be living in a completely different world. I think
What does that world look like, Jason?
it looks like a lot of AI. I think there's different ways it can go. I think it can be a dystopia or a utopia, but I think AI is going to be much more prominent. I think we're going to have significant challenges with our physical environment. Like I think there's going to be a lot of modifications and changing with how, sort of the world is living. I think, our energy, how we're consuming energy is going to be changed. But I think AI is going to be the biggest thing. I think AI is going to be the most important and significant challenge that we deal with in this century and possibly beyond. I think it's going to pale in comparison all these other things we're talking about, because I don't see how.
And what if we lose our ability to generate electricity? There goes your AI. Like it's interesting how it's all really tied together.
Yeah.
You have electric vehicles. God, if there's a brownout, at least with gasoline, you have redundancy. Gas from this country,
Yep.
you have from that
Yeah.
country. There's, countries, we forget in the Western world, many countries have brownouts all the time.
Yeah.
Imagine you're relying on AI and then all of a sudden you have a brownout.
Yeah, I think that right now, for example, what's happening in the U.S., like I do think there needs to be a realignment of how people are using like natural gas. Like I think that the U.S. was too quick to start shutting certain things down. I do believe in global warming. I think that climate change is something that needs to be addressed primarily by industry, and I think that there are significant changes that we see in industry. But I think that it is important. But I think that it'll be solved. I think that there will be something, like there's always whether that's with AI or not with AI. I think that challenge will be resolved. I think that the biggest concern, I think we as a society have to look at the most important thing I think that we have right now as a society to address is this question of how are we going to, ethically speaking, or I guess ethically speaking, or as a society, how much role do we want technology to have in our lives? Like how much role?
Yeah, sorry, please.
Yeah, I think this is where you were going, is who are going to be the people who are deciding on
Who creates the algorithm?
who creates the
Enforces
algorithm? Yep. What kind of things are going to be in the algorithm? Is this just private industry? We're going to let them deal with it?
You're right. Like we're laying the ground to the infrastructure of this right now. And just like in our COVID episode, I was just like absolutely petrified of the scaffolding that we're building around us with the QR code system to go into a restaurant.
Yeah.
And now, are you familiar with the ArriveCan app and stuff like that?
You tell me about it, sir.
Yeah, well, we're the only country on earth, Canada, that requires everybody, and that means Canadians and foreign nationals. Is that what the correct word? Foreign nationals?
Yeah, I think so.
To have to download this app in order to gain entry to the country. Your passport and your, let's say, QR vaccine certificate on paper are not accepted.
That's crazy.
What on earth has all of a sudden developed to say that my freaking passport is not valid enough to be considered welcome home to Canada, and you're not going to pay a fine as you come into the country? If I don't download the app, it's a $5,000 fine. So as a Canadian, you can gain entry to the country, but you're going to have to pay the fine. What is, and never mind, okay, we can get into whether it's justified in health benefits or not. But the fact is that we're the only country in the world doing this. Are we smarter than all the other countries? Or we just have, again, going back to these new rules that we're creating here in Canada, simply being a very close kissing cousin to China in terms of our totalitarian grid-like approach to like restricting human movement and thought and words that we can speak, to the point you can't even return to your own country without downloading an app.
Yeah.
And you try to explain to a border agent, it's the rules. I'm following the Quarantine Act. You just have to do it. Why don't you just want to do it? And most people will sit there and simply stutter. Like, why wouldn't I do it? I have another 600 apps on my phone. This will just make it easier. And you have to think, like you were saying, long term, what kind of country are you developing?
Yeah.
What has all of a sudden invalidated your passport? If that QR code you got from the doctor, which I don't even know why somebody needs to be vaccinated to get on an airplane now, where you can sit inside a hockey arena of 21,000 people and they can all be unvaccinated, right? But no, we still need to have this app in order to come into the country, whether you're vaccinated or not. So yeah, like we are now an outlier amongst countries. We're the only country that's requiring an app to come into the country. Why? What was the health benefits? What is the security benefits? Can someone please explain it to me? And it was just in the news 2 days ago that the app has been actually found to violating, or at least they're looking into it, lawyers and whatnot, for violating your privacy. It's tracking you. Precisely what the government said it wasn't doing. Which I knew for sure from some weird instinct, and just looking at all these laws, you don't need to see once a javelin is thrown in the air, you can kind of see where it's going to land approximately.
Right.
And the javelin is up in the air and it's moving in a certain direction, you can see where it's going. You simply start to connect the dots with the leadership we have in the country, the type of laws that are being enacted, the direction in which they're going, the velocity at which they're going, and you can simply start to make pretty darn good educated guesses. If you can tell what the end goal is, when the new mechanisms are put into play, you know they're heading towards that direction.
Right.
You know? So it's for that instance, and going to what the future holds in AI, yeah, I see that being wrapped into, well, of course, we've had as Canadians, we know we try to keep the country safe as Canadians, on and on and on, about why this app will keep you safe and why you need a digital ID and you need to have 1 million boosters. None of it based in science.
What does ArriveCan do? Like,
what does it do?
So you're entering, like, for example, if I download the app, I put in my name and address. And
I haven't done it yet, but you put your name, your address, your vaccine certificates, when you did it last, what's your quarantine protocol in case you test positive, because there's random testing, things of that nature. And then off you go. I've read that it slows down processing by 400%, and we know what state the airports are in right now.
Right.
Of course, if you and I were downloading it, I'm sure we'd be one of the ones that get through it really quickly. A lot of people say they have no issue with it at all. But it's only in 4 languages, and when you're accepting people from around the world, not everybody's going to know how to answer this.
Yeah.
If you're a family in a minivan crossing the bridge from Detroit into Windsor, and you're told as an American family, you can't come in unless you download this app, and you're stuck in line, you're going to be slowing. And what is the benefit of that? What is the health benefit?
Well, it's still remarkable with COVID. Like, the cat is out of the bag. Like, let it, like, who are you even bothering to track anything anymore? Everybody has it. You know what I mean?
Do you know if you're unvaccinated now and you return from abroad on a vacation, finally in Canada, the unvaccinated can get on an airplane. It just happened about a month ago. The Liberal government was twisting and turning every which way not to allow it to happen. It was the Conservatives that kept drilling them, going, again, you're an outlier amongst countries. Every other country is allowing unvaccinated people on airplanes except Canada. Yeah. And it's the only country with a digital ID that requires you in order to get on an airplane, the ArriveCan app. And as you're returning, a person who's unvaccinated, though, has to do things a vaccinated person does not have to do. They have to have a PCR test before they get on the airplane, a PCR test when they get off the airplane. Then they have to quarantine for 14 days despite having 2 negative tests. And when they come up to you in the airport to do that test, they come up in a giant hazmat suit, as if you're some specimen off the Krypton, you know? And guess what? That $17 an hour person that's sticking the thing up your nose is going to go home on the GO train later tonight or go in an arena and be around a ton of unvaccinated people. Yeah. But it's all performance theater, and they're going to walk up to you in that giant hazmat suit to freak the hell out of you.
Yeah.
How is that science? How is that health? I am not anti-mandate, but the mandates have to match the threshold of the disease we're dealing with and the efficacy of the mitigation tactics we're using, in this case, vaccines, right? And it doesn't. So the game to me is they're just othering other people, making your life difficult, trying their darndest not to even allow unvaccinated people on an airplane. And even about a month ago or so, around that time, Trudeau was saying, well, we're not going to force people to be vaccinated, but there will be consequences. Dude, it's 2022. You know, it's not March 2020. Yeah. Where are you going? You are a psychopath.
Well, you just deprioritized this podcast. Way to go.
Yeah, go viral or go home. I mean this with the bottom of my heart. It makes no sense scientifically. It's vindictive, and I only see it as trying to create the mass formation around, well, the digital IDs, the ArriveCan app, the vaccinations allowed us to get back to our normal life. Bullcrap. Full stop.
Yeah.
And I won't, this is not the nature of this episode, I can ream on scientific studies out there that, you know, you really don't need to continually keep, I won't even go far, but continually keep vaccinating everybody to get through. It's 2022. We're dealing with Omicron, not Delta or Alpha.
What do you think, though, is the motivation for, like, why? Because even Trudeau must have some inkling that there's no way that his administration is going to continue indefinitely into the future. So, like, what is he setting the stage for? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, you know, he's got that unholy alliance now with the NDP. Out of nowhere, they just sort of created one mega party.
Right.
What did the NDP get out of this? Can I please see Jagmeet Singh sit down on CBC and have a 1-hour interview? Why did you do this? Why did you agree to this? Mm-hmm. And what are you trying to get out of this? Simply because you want to have a national dental health care plan? That's it? That's what you're doing? Like really?
Yeah.
And it's under we call it this sort of merger that they allow bills like C11 to pass without anyone even knowing about it.
Which one is C11 again?
The one that dealing with the CRTC regulating the internet.
Oh, okay.
So while he's created this mega party, they're pushing through these bills rapid fire to really create a whole new Canada in the, maybe, like you said, limited time they still have.
Yeah.
And then to your point about a couple of minutes ago, will Pierre Poilievre actually pull the plug on these bills?
Yeah.
If he were to become prime minister. Because if he doesn't, then he's exposed.
But yeah, but it would be almost in his interest to not pull it, because, you know, he'll benefit to some extent, right?
Power wants these things. Yes, that's why you got to be careful the matrix that you're building.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Because he's going to have to look at his caucus at that point and go, well, guys, I'm going to get rid of this, and it's actually going to make our job harder.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And maybe that's the nature. Maybe the government's job should be harder to a degree, and that's why we have to vote for things that limit government in these cases.
Yeah, like democracy isn't easy. Like, you know, it's a lot easier to push laws through if you've got if you're Hitler or Stalin. You know what I mean? It's like they didn't have any real problem with it. They would just be like, well, this is just the way it is now, and everyone's like, yes, mein Führer. You know?
Yeah. They would probably say democracy is a hindrance to good governance, but in that case, it would have just been democracy was a hindrance to governance, whether it was good or not. Right. You know, they didn't really care. What did Stalin say? If one person dies, it's a tragedy. If 1 million people die, it's a statistic.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that kind of nature of things. So yeah, moving off of Stalin though, and on to current versions of the same issues. Do you know about the appointment of Professor Susan Michi? Have you heard of this lady?
No.
Well, apparently she's an academic expert in the twin sciences of nudging and behavioral insights. Wonderful.
Sounds suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah. And between nudging people, behavioral insights, and the second part being public health. So it's very much like a collectivist solutions. And she's a long-standing member of the Communist Party. Wonderful.
So she was appointed somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
She's now going to be chair of the World Health Organization committee that is specifically tasked with bringing nudge theory into national health programs.
Nudge theory. Oh, okay. Yeah. The idea of like
coercing people.
Like, of course you would want the vaccine. Everybody's getting it. That kind of thing.
Only good people do it. Yeah. All the behavioral mechanisms involved. And she's a communist.
Well, I would say one thing though about this. Like, so I think though, like any, because I want to make sure that we're consistent and that, or I should say, just in general, people should try to be consistent in terms of, like, I hate it when you see the left try to malign somebody on the right for just one instance. Like, they'll find some little quote of Jordan Peterson. Of course. So I want to be like, communist what, when she was like 19 or like...
No, she still is her whole life, unabashedly.
Okay. Well, then, by all means, let the sparks fly.
But I completely understand what you're saying, because throwing somebody under the bus for like having a belief that is not in line with what I have is not what I'm all about. But when that person joins in this capacity the World Health Organization, which is supposed to not be a political organization, these officials are not elected. It's supposed to be a technical body, right? But if you're going to go in there with that kind of using behavioral nudging with your own personal bias towards centralized mechanisms of controlling the populace, it really speaks to the lack of respect to the individual.
Right.
And that really bothers me.
Yeah.
The end goal, it's not the goal that bothers me, it's the means in which you're getting people there.
Yeah. And and don't get me wrong, I do think that also that people should be held responsible for their views. If people are communists, they certainly have a right to their own belief, but you can't then distance yourself from, I would have a problem with somebody in certain aspects of public policy, maybe like this one, and because I don't think a communist worldview is consistent. Well, communist worldview is not consistent with mine. So, I would naturally object to that, and I think most people would in Western nations.
It's not a communist plot or like I hate this, like conspiracy theory, but what it is taking a worldview of how a society should operate and removing it from normal democratic conversation.
Right.
It's really her worldview actually works to her advantage in being involved with something like the World Health Organization. So like, this is what you're going to do. Right. And define health. Health these days it's expanding. Is it economic health, social health, racial equity health, viral and bodily health? Like it's so ambiguous. You can go anywhere now with this sort of ever-growing apparatus, let's call it, around us, which would only completely be any communist's wet dream.
Right.
It's literally like you're using the most benign of things in order to enact political change globally.
Right.
Which is like, what, you're against good health?
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary where we're going. I think that it becomes scarier. I keep bringing AI into this, but I think it becomes scarier when some of this stuff starts to take hold. And I think we're heading into a time, and I'm sure there's been plenty of generations that have said this about different things, but I do think that the age we're going into is going to be different than any other. Because once you start to get AI doing the job of thinking for us in many ways and sort of building upon that, when it's not humans who are designing anything anymore, but we're only designing the designers, then I think we get to a different level that becomes more difficult to, like, some of these totalitarian instincts become harder to, or initiatives become harder to check once you get to the threshold of AI.
Well, how can you possibly have a like you said, the emergence of AI being all dominating in our lives moving forward? How can that be anything other than the centralization of everything?
Right.
Does this empower the individual? Does it augment the individual to be more independent?
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like it would ever go in that direction. It's going to look, at least the way it's been programmed and the way it's been developing, more towards a collective good.
Right.
Through this mechanism, rather than just like you as an individual should make the right choices, and you as an individual make the right choices, and then collectively through our individual independent choices, we have a good collective result.
And and I think that it's important to have conversations like this, but it's also important to sort of spread the word and vote with vote with these things in mind while we still can. It's against the irresistible force of entropy, right? Like, we want to make sure that we're the mountains.
I almost have no apps on my phone. And people are like, well, why did you buy a smartphone for? I'm like, well, I've got a camera, I got a GPS, I have email. It's pretty amazing. I can text anybody in the world immediately. What do you mean I have no apps? Like, how many apps do I actually have? I want to use Facebook. I do it on a browser, and I load it up with all the ad blockers and everything I can. And guess what? I'm not against first-party tracking. It's third and fourth and fifth-party tracking that drives me bonkers,
So what about, you get into freedom of movement and stuff like that. What if you just don't have a mobile phone? Like, you can't leave the country anymore?
Well, if you're traveling with someone else, you're supposed to be able to put it on their phone.
I see.
But it's still digital.
So what happens if you're of a religious group that for example, like, what is it? Mennonites or whoever doesn't, like, use technology?
Good luck with that.
I love that they're only going to be the ones who are like, we're the only ones left standing now.
Told
you guys all killed yourselves.
Waited
This is exactly what we were talking about. No, but like, you have 3 of them. They want to go, party up in Vegas or whatever. So they're coming back and they can't get into the country.
Is it not a human rights issue?
Yeah, I believe it is.
It really is. We are forcing segregation through digital means, and it's sold as convenient and helping safeguard Canadians. But I don't find it particularly convenient, and I don't see any safety involved. Right. I just see digital handcuffs, if you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, this is just the beginning in many ways, and I really think we need to sort of fight while we still can. And it's weird seeing Canada as one of the biggest problems.
Maybe that's how they catch us.
Yeah.
The country you least expect it. We have public health here that we grew up loving and trusting, but since 1994, it's been predominantly funded by pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
But that trust was built up. The
Right.
CBC, which is a Canadian broadcasting company, our state media here, we grew up as Canadians really trusting it. And then if you can actually then take the thing that we trust most, and then, the country that's famous for saying sorry.
Yeah.
And then, so it's almost like the perfect, what would you call it? When you
Test case or
where you
prototype?
present one face, but underneath it's completely the opposite.
Right. Yeah.
Because you don't see it coming.
Yeah.
That's something you would expect out of a Russia or a China or even a Germany,
Yeah.
Or Austria, but not out of a Canada. And it
Right.
makes it like the perfect, the word escapes me, but
I know what you mean, but I can't think of it either.
yeah.
Wolf in sheep's clothing, you can say, for example, but I don't. There is a word that encapsulates it. But anyway, I think that's anyway. It's all very interesting. This is just the beginning. I think that we'll see a lot more of this, and we'll have to have more conversations like this. I think this is the 40th time we've recorded this. So like I just wanted to again say to everybody, thank you for listening. We're going to wrap that up for today. And also, please spread the word if you like this, and send us feedback if you're so inclined. We would like to get, we do have some initiatives sort of in the works to get our conversation going a little more bilaterally with our audience. But in the meantime, shoot us an email or reach out to us on Facebook, and tell your friends if you like this podcast so they can listen too, and we can get more people listening and spread the word, as they say. And on that, anything you want to say final there, Dimitri?
Not at all. I think it's conversations like this and just working through it. I find, as we, what I really enjoyed is, we're both having a lot of counterpoints to our points as we're trying to suss out what is the right way through. It's not an easy course to chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on that note, everybody have a good night and take care out there.